She's doing this pictures as well. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you guys can hear me. If you can hear me, may you please indicate on the chat box by saying hello or anything if you can hear me clearly. Well, thank you so much for the indication. So, my name is, thank you so much. Um, Thank you so much for the indication. My name is Mbegezeli Mazibugo, and I will be the facilitator for this specific breakaway session. And I do believe that you have heard the case studies before we came to this breakout room. So the the purpose, or rather the goal, is to discuss on the case studies, both the first one and the second one, right? And I'll be to initiate the discussions. I will be giving the three questions for each. But for now, we'll first focus on the one, and then and then you will give your opinions and your views. And after that, I will share a link, and you will need to go to Mentimeter and write out what your key words, your key takeaways from the discussions. So everybody will get a chance to write out as to what is it that they've heard from the discussion. So it is very much important, or rather, it is of crucial importance for us to listen to one another and have an ear to learn. And I really and strongly encourage each one of us to unmute and to speak. And yes, so without wasting more time, focusing on the first case study, I will like us to discuss. So now that you've listened to the case study, I'd like to know, what did you hear about the complexities, or rather the complexity that is arising from interrelationships, or the absence of relationships between the different elements or the stakeholders in the first case study that you had. And said, I strongly encourage that you communicate by unmuting. I will read out the question again. So, from the first case study you heard, I would appreciate if we can discuss the interrelationships, or rather the complexity that is arising from interrelationships, or the absence of relationships between the different elements, stakeholders, and etc. Uh, so that all everybody can hear me, or rather be able to participate, I will share the question on the chat box. Uh, at Denga, can you still hear me? Can everybody still hear me? Yes, you may proceed to speak, Dana.
Oh, hi. Yes, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I was just, I was just struck by, the difficult, or rather the number of relationships that actually needed to exist. So at the beginning, when it all started, I thought, okay, it's just, the Safa, the Amandla, the Edu football group who are going to have a relationship with the National Treasury, and, everything will be sorted. But all of a sudden, it's like the municipality you have to deal with, and there's the community because the football group had a certain idea of what they wanted to do, but then National Treasury was saying, we need to engage around issues around safety and so on. And then there's all those relationships also with, and then yes, for youth was a revelation. Was like, okay, they're actually subcontracting or subleasing from SAFA, and so then the relationship then with the funder, the Pepsi, relationship with the city. And so there's just a lot of, relationships typically around, a particular document or a particular agreement that all seem to be happening all at the same time and in parallel and circular and so on. So that was just my observation of that. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. That was very insightful. And anybody else who's willing to share what they have seen, or rather to break down the question. So we basically, I want to hear the opinion you have, or rather what you've heard about the complexity that is arising from the interrelationships or the absence of relationships between the different elements in each in the first case study. Can speak on the complexities within the relationships or the absence of relationships in the first case study. Please feel free to unmute and state your opinion. I will soon post the link to the Mentimeter. So to write out as to what insights have you gained from the from the discussion that we are supposed. David, may you please share your insight, and Bulelo too, you can do that. So, David, may you kindly. Oh, Wendy, I will gladly repeat as to what needs to be done in the session, and I hope you can hear me. So, what needs to be done is we are now working on the first case study, and we need to discuss. Conversation starter will be discussing the complexity that is arising from the interrelationships or the absence of relationships between the different elements, be it the stakeholders and a lot more other things in the first case study. Thank you so much. In the relation, mute and speak on the complexity within the interrelationships or the absence of relationships. David and Bulelwa, you may also unmute and participate in the conversation. If you're not clear about the question or anything or what needs to be said, you can gladly unmute and also ask for clarity. In the meantime, I will be on what you have heard from the discussion. Right. So from for the first discussion that we have made, right, the link is on the. You will share the insights on what you have heard from the conversation. No, we had Denga open the stage for us, speaking on the relationships, and we only have 20 minutes to discuss this first case study, and I believe we have around about 10, 11 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So we need to move on to the second question, rather, this question. Okay, for the second one, I also need us to participate. So from the first case study, I'd like to know the what you've heard about the complexity that is arising from the different stakeholder needs and interest and multiple diverse perspectives. So the complexity that is arising from the different stakeholder needs and interests and multiple diverse perspectives. So from the face case study, right? You can either unmute or you can give your opinion on the chat box. You are more than welcome to raise your hand to speak. Uh, can I just Wendy? Did you get the question? And also, you're more than welcome to speak on the complexity that is arising from the different stakeholder needs and interests and multiple diverse perspectives. While on that, there is a while on that there is a link on the chat where you can simply write out the insight that you got from the discussion. Denga, you can speak.
Thank you. I was just going to say it was interesting. I mean, and maybe because the case study, the second case study was presented, in the form of reflections already. So, the presenter had kind of integrated and analyzed in many ways the case itself. But what did strike me in that case, unlike the former one, was that it was almost as if the BC MDA took everything on itself, and so there were these relationships between the community. They had relationships with contractors, they had relationships with the city, but kind of like back and forth relationships with each of those individually, and it was like they were the kind of the clearinghouse for these relationships
Oh
that
yes, oh
should have
yes.
been taking place between and amongst all those parties. Thanks.
Right. Thank you so much, Denga. Anybody else who wants to add, has a different opinion? Should this Masinita, you're more than welcome to speak. Yes. Masinita, you can unmute your mic.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Thanks. Thanks,
Yes.
colleagues. Let me repeat what I said. I'm
No
saying I
worries.
think what came striking for me as a practitioner in the two presentations on systems thinking, which is an interesting approach, but not very far from the other approaches that you use as practitioners, particularly when you look at stakeholder. Hey, I'm even afraid to say stakeholder management after that class. So in stakeholding, it is the
Yes.
most important aspect. I think it's the first, it's the foremost and the most important one. You do a shortcut, you'll catch up with it a little later. In many ways, you catch up
Yeah.
by conflicts within the government, it's within the city itself. Before you go to government, within the city itself, you catch up with other government departments that have to come into play, especially precinct management, because precinct management is a very good example of how um, all of society, all of government, private sector comes together to change spaces. So we need maybe to devote enough time and thinking and approaching on this very important area, because all those challenges you see come in because one of the stakeholders was not there right at the beginning of it. They come, they can't play their role without really sometimes trampling on someone's space, and so on. So if you look at the second case study and all those challenges that we presented, it's likely a great lesson for all of us, but that's what we see every day. But that's what we don't have time for, because when I start a project, I'm already in my individual performance plan, having times at which I need to finish. So we have not devoted the attention that stakeholder management requires, but the effects are backfiring. Very good example is the issue that was raised in the morning when Professor Sputler presented on the issues around the business disruptions. Yes, there's a case for both examples that he gave, for those that are mafia kind of, which is a criminal activity, and those that are rightfully giving you a message that you should have engaged about this. It's happening in our space, it's benefiting our community, and we certainly in 2022 have a stake in these very important issues. So I don't know how else to take forward this matter around, much as our Municipal Systems Act does specify what public participation process should be all about. We're still not there in terms of devoting the time and giving the valuable attention to what stakeholder management is all about. So at the end of the day, it's about satisfying the interest in all those aspects. So what comes out is we now need to think differently. These things are not new. So maybe if we have not been devoting enough time, let's look at the regulatory frameworks around public participation. Colleagues, you know what it is, what it takes in a municipality to seek via council engagement with public. It may take you about 6 weeks to put a proposal through committees to exco to council that we want to engage on this with this kind of grouping on this kind of matters. So, but it certainly for me has regulatory implications. But we cannot continue without thinking around development facilitation the way we've been doing for years. Thanks.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Masinita. That was so insightful. And that was really great. Thank you so much. And to the rest of the colleagues in the chat, and also Masinita and Denga, there is a link on the chat box on your right, on the right of the screen. May you please click in there and also write out the insights which you have gained from this conversation that we're having. And for the very last time, I would ask if we discuss at least one more point on the complexity that is arising from the different stakeholder needs and interests and the multiple diverse perspectives. So, if any of the colleagues would like to speak, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, and then I will allow you to speak, or you can simply unmute or type on the chat box so that we can move on to the third one and we can move on to the second case study. Or if you are unclear, you can ask again for me to clarify. Maybe there's a part of the question that you do not understand. You're more than welcome to ask. Nevertheless, I'd like us to participate fully on the Mentimeter, for we at the end of the presentation need to discuss the insights gained. Right, so with Denga, yes.
I was just going to say that it was kind of interesting to see that so there's kind of like relationships within each of the various groups. So within the Amandla Edu football group, There's relationships within the Yes for Youth thing. There's also within Ekurhuleni municipality itself. I suppose within the contractors and then amongst the suppliers. So there's relationships kind of within those groups, but then also kind of between those groups and the various other people that they interact with. So, people come to it both as, I suppose, individuals within a particular group who've gathered and who are grouped for ostensibly achieving the same goal, which might be anything from the soccer team to, I suppose, National Treasury being, governors of the national fiscus and so on. But then also then interactions between those two, those people aggregated as groups then interacting with another group who are aggregated. So National Treasuries are now interacting with the group who are the Edu football group and the group who are the contractors and so on. So it's just that kind of sense of sort of individual and group relationships. Thanks.
Oh yes, oh yes. Thank you so much, Denga. So we will move on to the third discussion, which is the complexity. What did you hear about the complexity that is arising from the power play issues, conflicts, and inability to manage them? What did you hear about the complexity that is arising from the power play issues, conflicts, and inability to manage them? That will be our last discussion point for the first case study, and then we will quickly run to, or rather, go on to the second one with the same three discussion points. Wendy, David, Masingida, Denga, you are more than welcome to unmute and share your opinion on the complexity that is arising from the power play issues, conflicts, and inability to manage them on the first case study.
Uh, Thanks. I mean, I think there was definitely, from the beginning, it sounded, this is quite clear. You have a little project set up, and we'll just have to, there's money, and it should move ahead when the presentation first began. But I think what was very clear very early on, and this actually emerged, I think, when the presenter was speaking from National Treasury perspective, almost the exasperation about, all these the dynamics that take place within the municipality itself in terms of planning, procurement, and construction. But then also this sense that, National Treasury with the money is kind of the power broker. And so they, we have the money and, we'll distribute it. But, certain things, and I think along with that, there came almost the implicit thing that but we should be driving it, and we have expectations because it's our money. And yet, so the other stakeholders are kind of, needing to implement this particular project. So what was very interesting was to hear that, at the very end was like, another national department, DHS, Human Settlements, was kind of left in the dark, or sort of came very late to the party. And yet, you'd imagine that, as perhaps the sector department responsible for actually what happens on the ground, but not having the money, they should have been there. So there was that sort of power dynamic between two national departments. But then, of course, also between the municipality itself and everybody below them. So everybody there procuring services from sort of the contractors and the suppliers. So that clearly was an imbalance, a power imbalance, a natural one, I suppose, given that they're doing the procurement. And so that was just something that occurred to me. Thanks.
Oh yes, thank you so much, Dana, for such insight. And I have posted another link on the chat. Yes, Masita, you're more than welcome to speak on this point also. But prior to that, I'd like to say that I have posted another link to the Mentimeter, and may you kindly fill in for the second link, you are required to capture the word, or rather, what word capture the blind spots in the way the situations in the case study are being looked at. And then and of course you draw these words from the discussions we're having currently, and also on the same link, you capture the words of the unintended consequences of the interventions in the case study, also drawn from the conversations that we are currently having, and must point.
Yes, thanks. I think for me, the I think the presenter touched a bit on the issues around um, regulatory approvals, because it's regulation. Sometimes there's very little flexibility on that, and I think what came across
Mm,
since the discussions in the morning is how delays are brought about by this long wait for EIAs, TIAs, EIAs, environmental impact assessment, traffic, whatever, because it's linked to development of infrastructure projects. So we may not see it as it is, that is bringing the very first conflict. But when you come to the community, startup, inform them that you are doing a project. There are some projects that get started but are now delayed because we are waiting for a particular phase of some regulatory approval to be finalized. And unfortunately, whoever is leading it is not feeling the challenges on the ground while we sit and hold, because there are things that you cannot do before you've been issued with a license, a WULA, or and so on and so on. But some projects are already on the ground and they get delayed by another phase of the project. So I find that to be, from what I know and what I've experienced as a practitioner, something where we need to find
mhm,
to do things differently, like they're doing now with the critical projects like the strategic infrastructure project. They are given very specific and special concessions to say we will be able to approve your EIA or your TIA within this frame of time. So what stops it from escalating? Much as we know there are a lot of projects, what stops the authorities in question to find of ways of really fast tracking such approval so that development can happen on the ground? You are not able to explain to the community what you are waiting for a TIA. I am a practitioner myself. I understand what a TIA is, but sometimes I think you get hit by that feeling that this one can go on with or without that particular approval of a TIA. So for me, that is the most important conflict. And when we conceptualize projects and put them on the ground, we cannot ignore that. Thanks.
oh, yes, thank you so much, Masinita. That was so insightful, and coming from somebody who has really experienced that, as you've said, that you're a practitioner, that is very um, insightful. And thank you so much for that. So also, please make sure that as we discuss, make sure to put in your insights, and also what your rather keywords on insights, and also the unintended consequences on the Mentimeter, so that we can come back and reflect together as a team. And also, without wasting more time, we're going to move on to the second case study right now, as you have heard. So basically, we will be using the very same points we used as a point of discussion for the first case study, but now we will be working on the second case study. So now I will just repeat the first point. It says that as you have listened to the case study, what did you hear about the complexity that is arising from the interrelationships or the absence of relationships between the different elements in that particular case study? It may be stakeholders or whoever was involved in the complexity that is arising from the interrelationships or the absence of relationships between the different elements of stakeholders. So if you may, we may discuss that for the second case study. That would be much appreciated. May we discuss this on the first case study? On the second case study, rather. I apologize. The complexity that is arising from the interrelationships or the absence of relationships between the different elements, stakeholders, and what more others. I found the second case study was analyzed and discussed by the presenter, so was there was less to figure out for us. Okay, Mr. Denga, I presume that that will be the sentiment for everybody else. So I guess I will liaise with Marilee and know what to do. But in the meantime, please do for the first case study, because we have gained insight, we have discussed the first case study. Will you please kindly fill in the words in the Mentimeter? Each participant has an opportunity to fill up to 7 words, so we can build up a word, a word cloud, so that we can come back and reflect as to what is it that we have learned from the first case study, and then with the second case study, as you have said, that it was analyzed and dissected by the presenter. Then I don't see the need that we should really discuss it any further. So if you may kindly put in the words in there. And thank you so much. We will meet again to discuss the results. Thank you so much, Denga. Thank you, Masingita. Thank you, David. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everybody else who was present, or rather came to the session.